I know moon is Tsuki.
Kino, something.
Kinokuniya.
I only know that.
Sailor Tsuki.
Kino something. Kino something. Are you ready?
Hi everyone, welcome to PixelStudio's Now You Know session, where we share interesting information so that we can discover, learn, and enjoy together as we go along towards lifelong learning. So today we have Claudia to share with us some facts about the French Revolution.
Whoa, French Revolution.
During the French Revolution, they call themselves the Age of Reason. Another word for Age of Reason is actually the Enlightenment. So basically, in this period in history, they prioritized reason as a virtue. Despite calling themselves reasonable people, they actually led very excessive lives. Basically, the leaders are excessive with pleasure. So in the end, they ended up being killed by the people. So the French Revolution is a timeline from 1789 to 1799, approximately 10 years. The key terms for this age is called the Age of Reason, the death of the monarchy, and the reign of terror. It all started with national bankruptcy because when the government ran out of money and also with bad harvest, nobody has anything to eat and the economy is really bad. So who do they blame it on who has absolute power? They blame it on the king. So this leads to the storming of the Bastille, which is a prison fortress that is actually almost empty, but they still storm it anyway. And that leads to the Reign of Terror, where it is famous for the guillotine, and all the intellectuals, the royalists, and everyone associated with them are now traitors to the state. So they actually execute all of them. This paves the way to the rise of Napoleon, who takes advantage of the reign of terror to create his own government called the Consulate. That's the brief overview. One of the political theorists of the time, his name is Denis Diderot. He says men will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest. So basically, this quotation is representative of the political attitude at the time. They are trying to take down the monarchy, while at the same time they're trying to take down religion. So everything that was part of French society, which is the king as the head of the state and the priest as the religious leader, they're just trying to take everyone down. And basically, this is why it led to anarchy. And they used the reign of terror to control people with terror. Yeah, this is the political attitude at the time. These are three enlightened philosophers behind the revolution. So the first one is Denis Diderot, who was the one who created the quote in the previous slide. He actually created the first encyclopedia. That is his life's work. And basically he wants to compile all the knowledge from ancient to pre-modern times so that he can educate the common man. So Rousseau is a political theorist who famously wrote The Social Contract and is famous for the quote, "Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains." So what this means is that people are born with a human right for freedom. That's what the French Revolution was fighting for. However, society is oppressive. So even though we are all born with a human right and we deserve to be free, society has hierarchy that locks us into chains, and that is where oppression comes from. Basically, he is championing the third estate, which is the common people. They have the most power because they have the power of numbers, but they have no power to change anything. That's his cause he's trying to champion behind the revolution. And Montesquieu is another political theorist who wrote The Spirit of Laws, and his work would influence Western politics forever. So the Enlightenment was a rebellion of the archaic way of thinking, and they're trying to combine science to push for progress. That's why they call themselves enlightened. And it is because of these three people, their contributions to political theory, that would rebirth the democracy from ancient Athens that will work in modern times. So the first stage of the revolution begins in the 1780s, slightly before the revolution starts. and it starts because of national bankruptcy. So the French actually had an important role to play in the American Revolution because they actually funded soldiers to go to the American Revolution to fight with the Americans. And they spent a lot of money and their lives are very excessive and pleasure-seeking. So with these two factors, the national treasury is nearly empty. Combined with 2 decades of failed harvest, no one has anything to eat. And the French dietary staple is bread. So when the wheat harvests have failed, they don't have enough resources to make flour. So this leads to the bread riots, where everyone is fighting because they're starving. They want to have bread to eat. This leads to the Estates General, which is a meeting where the king calls everyone to discuss about taxes. They're trying to figure out a way to appease the masses, but still get them to pay them taxes so that they can fund their lifestyle and also get out of trouble. So this painting that you see on this slide, the art style is called Rococo. It is the prevalent art style of the 18th century and is characterized by asymmetry, naturalism, pastel colors, lightheartedness, and a delicate form. Naturalism means that they go back to nature. So they idealize nature as a very romantic thing. And with the use of colors, like pastel colors, it shows that it's very lighthearted, very frivolous, very hedonistic, and the way they paint it is in a delicate form. So that's Rococo. So you've all heard of the quotation, "Let them eat cake." The context of this quote comes when Queen Marie Antoinette, she hears of how the masses are having an uprising so that they can get food to eat because they have no bread. So instead of helping the masses, she says, "Let them eat cake." But that is not helping anything because cake is also made of flour, and they don't have flour because the wheat crop has died. So these are the royals that ignorantly instigated the revolution because they were not interested in fixing the problem. They just kept permeating the problem with their lifestyle. So Louis XVI was the last king of France who was executed during the Reign of Terror. He actually listened to bad advice, so he deregulated the grain market, which caused the prices of bread to skyrocket, leading to mass starvation and public revolts. Even though there was some bread, nobody could afford to buy it. It's like mocking the masses with wealth and absolute power. So Marie Antoinette was his wife, she was the queen. And instead of sacrificing her own vanity to save the masses, she actually took the flour and kept dusting her wigs to keep them looking white. Because she had a hand to play in provoking the masses with her lack of reasoning during the circumstances, she ended up dying at the hands of the starving masses during the Reign of Terror. Necker was the finance minister under Louis XVI, and he was a financial genius who earned himself the power to raise interest rates from the banks for the monarchy's debts instead of raising taxes. So that is his accomplishment, despite the tumultuous time. The key definitions. The Estates General was the meeting so that the king could sort through his finances. But instead of meeting the objectives, there was a radical change that prompted the creation of a legislative assembly for the Estates General to seize the sovereignty from the hands of the king. They realized that the meeting was leading nowhere. The Third Estate, which is the bourgeoisie or the rest of France, they grouped together to form their own government body to force the king to give them what they want, because the king is not being cooperative. This leads to the tennis court oath, where the failed Estates General was now being controlled by the common people, and they all went to the tennis court to sign an oath to keep the government from separating through a violent revolution. At this point, they still don't want a revolution. They are still trying to compromise with the monarchy. It's just that because of the values of the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, they now realize that they don't have to give the king absolute monarchy. They can actually negotiate for their own rights because of the context of the times. Basically, during this time, the middle class was starting to rise. So actually, you can say that the French Revolution was the birthplace of the middle class. Before this, it was feudalism. So it was only you're very rich or you're very poor. It's either servants or masters. But because of the middle class, they're starting to realize that they have power as numbers. So they actually fight for what they want, and this is the turning point of the French Revolution. So the estates of the realm is also known as the social class. The first estate is the clergy of the church, which shows who is the one in power in France at the time, which is why they are trying to take down the church. The second estate is the nobility. They executed the nobility during the Reign of Terror. And the third estate is the bourgeoisie, or the rest of France. So that's basically everyone else who is trying to fight for a republic where they are equal and they have democracy. The National Assembly is a new government that represents the bourgeoisie that resulted in the suspension of taxes, and it also gave them more power. So the storming of the Bastille. The insurgents wanted to secure gunpowder, weapons, and grain from the prison fortress because these were things that they were already freaking out over, that they wanted to protect themselves with. The Bastille is a symbolism of absolutism. When people see the Bastille, they see the king. And when they took down the Bastille, it was a symbol for everyone in the land that the king is going to be taken down. And this led to the Great Fear because people were starting to realize that a very significant change is happening to them, and it will change their culture and their way of life forever. So in the Great Fear, basically, the king was feeling very insecure about his position as the absolute monarch. So he sent his troops to station around France, and people were panicking because they see this as the king trying to threaten them. So that's why there's a complete cycle of the events that lead to the storming of the Bastille. They retaliated for the king trying to control them, and it led to them revolting and taking down the Bastille. So this painting depicts the fall of the Bastille. It's a visual metaphor of the destruction of the monarchy's regime. When the fortress was seized by the insurgents of the revolution, many understood that a new era had arrived in Paris that led to hysteria and widespread panic. So the insurgents who radicalized the revolution, they were known as the sans-culottes. It wasn't just one person, but a body of people who were part of the third estate, but not part of the middle class, just higher above the peasants. And they were very willing to act on their violence because they are so radicalized, and that violence is their only answer to their life's problems. Since they had nothing to lose anyway, they had a lot of power in swaying the decisions made in the National Assembly. Even though the Bastille was nearly empty, they still decided to attack the Bastille and to steal from the weaponry and the grain house. And it showed that they were not fighting for equality, liberty, and fraternity. They were just trying to act on their violence. So the Bastille was taken down because people felt that the king was trying to undermine what they had agreed on in the Estates General, which leads to them creating their own constitution called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This declaration was significant because it abolished absolute monarchy, and it created a representative government with checks and balances. So nobody had absolute authority, and that they could have the power to override, let's say, the president, if they feel that the president is being tyrannical. It is to protect the people and the power of the government. So during this time, the royal family actually tries to flee Paris to the Netherlands, but they get identified by the people and they get arrested at Varennes. Their reputation plummets because they are seen as traitors to the state. And because of this act of cowardice, they see it as the king committing treason, and that's why he's a traitor. So for the National Convention, this replaced the National Assembly because they wanted to abolish monarchy, and it also led to the execution of the king and declared France to be a republic. This leads to the Reign of Terror. The invention of the guillotine was created for an assembly line for the efficient execution of suspected traitors to the new regime. But there was no real trial for people before they got guillotined. They basically guillotined whoever they hated. And that's why, even though it started off as something that they needed to purge the nation of traitors, it actually turned into a bloodbath. The person in charge of the Reign of Terror is called Robespierre. He was a tyrant in charge of the Committee of Public Safety all the way until his death by guillotine. So the person who created this bloodbath where he chops off the heads of people, ended up getting his head chopped off too, which is the irony of the times. And this reign of terror was culminated to such an extent that even the people were sick of the violence and the death. So the people revolted against the hedonistic excess of bloodshed, which paved the way for Napoleon's coup d'etat, which is his violent overthrow of the government to create his own government. There's this person called Duras. He said that king will now be ghost, friends, their friends is eternally regicide. Regicide means the death of the king. So they basically murdered the king in the name of democracy. It doesn't make any sense since they call themselves the Age of Reason and that they are enlightened, but that is what happened. And during the Reign of Terror, the streets of Paris were soaked with the blood of royals and traitors. Robespierre, his point of view is that to punish the oppressors of humanity is mercy, but to forgive them is cruelty. This is his reasoning and his justification behind the Reign of Terror, which is why he kept chopping off people's heads because he believes he's doing the right thing to protect people from even more cruelty, even though his actions are very cruel. So the villains of the revolution are Robespierre, Guillotine, and Sieyès. Robespierre was the leader who vowed to keep the public safe, even though he was the one who was responsible for the execution of approximately 17,000 people whose trials are debatable based on the principle of fairness. And the Committee of Public Safety was created to protect the people and to deal with the enemies of France. But it is the French people who ended up getting persecuted, which is very ironic. So the person who the guillotine is named after did not invent the guillotine and even impose the death penalty. But his name is tied to the guillotine, the torture device that led to efficient and less painful death because of the way he promoted and advocated for a more humane method of capital punishment. So he did not invent the guillotine even though the guillotine was named after him. So Sieyès was the one who participated in writing the final draft of the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen. He would later be the one who would plot the coup that would end the Reign of Terror. And he would attempt to create a government where Napoleon was only a figurehead and not a tyrant or a dictator, but he failed at that. And that failure paved the way for Napoleon to eventually become emperor. Basically, the Committee of Public Safety was radicalized and run by the Jacobins, and their sole aim was to destroy religion and the church while creating their own religion. However, the leaders of the committee also ended up being guillotined themselves. So this Festival of the Supreme Being was a cult that Robespierre created to replace Catholicism. So it was his way of creating a counter-religion and also to oppose the cult of reason. The cult of reason is basically people worshipping reason as the highest attainable virtue of the time. But it was still a cult and Robespierre hated it, so he created his own cult. His intention was to formulate a state religion that everyone has to believe in, despite the revolutionary cry for freedom, equality, and fraternity. Fraternity means friendship. So the Jacobins were the most radicalized revolutionary club in France that created and controlled the Reign of Terror, a movement that started with the intention to purge the nation of their enemies, but transformed into an irrational execution of personal grievances. The reason they succeeded during the Reign of Terror was because they encouraged violence and insurrection. So basically, they fed off people's emotions, kept pushing people to fight each other, and when everybody has someone they hate, which is their enemy, they immediately go to the Jacobins and basically incriminate their enemies regardless of whether or not they did anything wrong. And those people would be given a mock trial and then executed by guillotine. It was very senseless, it was very violent, and it was very cruel. So the Reign of Terror ended at an event called the Thermidorian Reaction. Thermidorian was named after a month in the French calendar that was created during the times to replace our normal Roman calendar. And in this calendar, the working days are 10 days a week instead of 7 because they're trying to abolish religion in the influence of daily life. They would work 10 days and then rest 1 day, and then they would have to participate in festivals of the Supreme Being on the 10th day, and then go back to work the next 9 days. It is very irrational and it is very cult-like. The Thermidorian reaction paves the way for Napoleon to seize control of France to create another form of government called the Directory. So the rise of Napoleon. Napoleon, during these times, he didn't really focus on getting famous or power during the Reign of Terror. Instead, he focused his attention on military conquest during the French Revolutionary Wars. So as all this Reign of Terror was happening domestically, the French were also fighting wars around Europe, and those were called the French Revolutionary Wars. So he succeeded as a military commander, and that's where he earned his reputation of being a very competent leader. So his lasting achievement was called the Napoleonic Code. So the Napoleonic Code basically created meritocracy instead of aristocracy, and it promoted equality before the law, property rights, religious toleration, modern secular education, sound finances, but it also abolished feudalism. This is the achievement of the French Revolution because a lot of modern countries, their government is based on the Napoleonic Code. After he succeeded in his French Revolutionary Wars, he came back to France and engineered a coup. It's called the coup of 18 Brumaire in 1799, and because he succeeded in this coup, he became the first consul of the Republic. So France is no longer a monarchy. It is no longer anarchic. It is now a republic. And he created a political system known as dictatorship by plebiscite. What this means is that Napoleon, he never said that he's the sole ruler of France. He never said that he was a dictator, but he acted like one. He created a government to give him the most power so that he could be a dictator. And plebiscite is basically a voting system where people vote, but the election is rigged. So dictatorship by plebiscite means that he got into the power by rigging the election, but by making people believe that he legitimately became the ruler everyone wants him to become. It's very deceptive. So Napoleon Bonaparte was a general who fought and won wars in a successful attempt to purge the monarchy during the revolution to actualize his true intentions of becoming emperor of France and continental Europe. Ironically, he died in exile after being deposed for his tyrannical rule. Madame Bastille was the daughter of Jacques Necker, the finance minister under Louis XVI. So she was highly intellectual and she was a celebrated woman during her times. But she and Napoleon became enemies and she fought him for the soul of Europe. However, she would also be exiled because Napoleon persecuted her. So they both ended up in exile and they both died in exile, and that's how the story goes. Joseph Fouché was the minister of the police, and he joined forces with Napoleon and Sieyès in plotting the overthrow of the Directory to create their own government called the Consulate. But when Napoleon stole his job, Napoleon was so intimidated by Fouché that he sent a servant to deliver the news to him. The Directory was the new government that they created. It consisted of 2 councils and 5 directors to rule the government. Only 5 directors were chosen from a list of 500, and they had executive power over the land. So the Council of 500 was the lower council in which landowners who had a stake in the nation's future could propose legislation but not vote. This means that because they have a stake in the nation's land, they're invested in the future of France. So they can create laws, but they cannot vote on the laws. It's a check and balance system. And the Council of Elders was the upper council in which only married or widowed men above the age of 40 could pass legislation, but they could not propose legislation. So the lower council could create laws, but only the upper council could pass those laws. They're trying to figure out how to create a system that is democratic and also opposed to the monarchy. So this leads to the establishment of the Consulate. It was created after the overthrow of the Directory, and this confirmed Napoleon's power. Because of this success, it would eventually be replaced by the First French Empire, in which Napoleon I becomes emperor. So Napoleon Bonaparte, Cambacérès, and Lebrun are part of the triumvirate, which means that it's a government with 3 leaders. However, 3 leaders means that the power will never be distributed equally. So, as first consul, Bonaparte has the most power of the triumvirate and had the executive right to reform the education system, develop the Napoleonic Code, which became the basis of many modern governments. However, he stayed in power by rigging the voting system and disguised his dictatorship by fooling the nation into believing that they were part of a democratic republic. The second consul was very much trusted by Napoleon. He had the power to handle state affairs as Napoleon turned to military endeavors. But he was very unpopular due to an economic downturn and his personal taste for high living. Lebrun had an active role in reorganizing the government and its national finances, and he also had the power to force the departments to adhere to the Napoleonic Code. And because he succeeded in his responsibilities, it later earned him the title of Art Treasurer of the French Empire. So the triumvirate has three leaders and is never equally shared in power. The coup is a bloodless coup that overthrew the Directory and replaced the government with the Consulate. And the Consulate secured the new triumvirate government by removing feudalism and establishing meritocracy. And even though Napoleon did not declare himself as the sole leader, he acted like one. The Constitution of the year 8 was a document that confirmed Napoleon's power and gave him the power of military dictatorship, even though it preserved the appearance of a republic. So the concluding thought, from a perspective from the citizen of the 21st century, by calling themselves the Age of Reason, it disguised the absurdity of the Reign of Terror. In fighting for freedom, they actually oppressed people even more. So it's ironic that they would call themselves the Age of Reason and that they are enlightened. So these are the reference lists, and now it's quiz time.
So if you want to bring back, take away any good that comes with this French Revolution? No, right?
Okay, so the good things that came out from the French Revolution is that when the masses fought the government for oppression and took down the monarchy, different countries around Europe actually found the courage to do the same. So this is why our modern governments are all republics and that there are no kings.
I see.
So that's something good that happened. And because of Napoleon, he actually made a uniform measuring system called the metric system. Yeah.
And also, do you know why the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen is so similar to the American Constitution? It's because of Lafayette. Lafayette, he played a huge role in the American Revolution also. You can go and watch Hamilton. It's on Disney Plus right now. So after he helped the Americans actually helped the France draft out this Rise of Man. That's why it's so similar, the two independence paper for people's rights.
Okay, start the quiz.
Ikozu?
Come on.
What symbolizes the Bastille?
Basically,
got it correct.
Ryan!
Woo! Right! The rest all got wrong.
Basically, the Bastille represents the French monarchy. The French monarchy was an absolute monarchy. So when they took down the Bastille, they're actually taking down absolute monarchy, which is where only the king has the power. One person has the most power, and nobody can oppose him. That's what it meant.
This is encyclopedia. Napoleon Bonaparte.
Kaya na mas catch up with Ryan eh.
The sang culottes.
It was violence.
I put killings.
Okay,
Actually,
killing.
I wanted to type guillotine everyone because essentially that's what they did.
No, they didn't
wait.
guillotine people. They were the people who were fed, who were emotional about the revolution, became radicalized, and then the people who guillotine people used the sans-culottes to give themselves power to execute people.
Yeah,
My doesn't culottes kill anyone because I put killings.
Death cannot. Death. I put death.
Death.
no. If you want to accept death, you have to accept guillotine.
No, guillotine is not death. Okay, moving on.
My
Okay.
alternate answer was I wanted to say that they were not part of the second class but they were not peasants either.
That
That
guy,
would have
yeah.
been okay, right?
I was like deciding bad guy or the one who like promotes death and stuff. Never mind, just put that.
There's too many French names.
Yeah.
Good.
Ah,
Okay, so fun fact, fourth estate is actually the media and the press. Because the media and the press, they have a lot of influence over politics. So that's the fourth estate, but it only developed after the French Revolution.
Another of the trick questions. Interesting.
Then Consulate. Napoleon dictatorship.
Joe, I like your face. You look so confused.
Ah!
Remember I said year 8?
Yes.
It's 8. Oh, they caught up.
Oh no.
Yo.
What state of society has France become?
Denial.
I actually already said the answer just now during the presentation.
Which one? You said a lot of things.
You know, there's monarchy, there's democracy.
Current France?
No, and during the revolution.
During the revolution.
Well, I hope I spelled it correct. Oh gosh.
Not sure, but
Yes, anarchy!
Yes, I got it.
Nice.
Okay, what were the other answers? Maybe I can give extra points.
No.
Nope.
nah, I'm pretty sure it's wrong.
Yep, pretty sure it's wrong.
Okay, next.
Wrong.
It's true. The Napoleonic Code is why a lot of republics, modern republics,
Hello, right?
have meritocracy and stuff like that. Yeah. Basically, it's for fairness and protects the people.
That's it, man.
I'm actually quite surprised I got more correct answer for this one
I got
compared to last week.
Yeah. Do you know how to?
Robespierre.
Robespierre was the one who controlled and designed the Reign of Terror. One way to remember his name is that he robs the people of their freedom and then he spears them. Yeah, Robespierre. Basically, it's the same idea, right? When you guillotine someone, you're actually spearing their necks. So he robs the people of their freedom and then he spears their necks. That's how you remember Robespierre as the main villain and the tyrant of the Reign of Terror.
Name of the lower council in the Directory.
That's right. So basically, the lower council has more people. It has 500 people. And the upper council, the Council of Elders, has, I think, 250 people. So it's a bit less. Yeah.
Which was composed by married men or
That's the upper council. The lower council is landowners. Yeah, so a lot of people own the land, right? That means they own most of France so that they can propose legislation because they're invested in the future of France. Yeah.
The last question. Who is Madam?
Madame de
That's
Stael.
Correct! Yay!
So,
the one is the last one is Marie Antoinette.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
only,
Last woman.
I only know that one. The painting, I know.
Number 2 and number 4 are both Marie Antoinette. Do you notice that she has white hair? So she powdered her wigs. Then the second one, the third one is the Rococo painting. So I don't know who she is, but that's the Rococo painting.
So,
Process of elimination.
oh, my Oh, this one there was Penny Darat.
Yay!
Yeah. Alaska. Good job.
Someone took their history lesson.
Yeah, I'm not good at history, so
So I'll stop
History.
here.
always got confused.
I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope that you'll have learned interesting history about French Revolution. Please subscribe if you have enjoyed this video and remember to give a thumbs up as well. Stay hungry for knowledge and keep learning. Stay safe everyone.
Bye.